children and young people, and we have quite a number of extra guests joining us this morning. Obviously welcome the Cabinet members, Councillor Richard John and Councillor Sarah Jones, and I know the leader of the Labour Party, Councillor Dimitri Batruni, is joining us, and obviously the presenters for the homelessness briefing report, Ian Bakewell, who's head of housing, and then we'll be moving on to Will McLean and a number of other officers. In terms of mics and cameras, I think predominantly if you're not speaking, then obviously please put your mic to mute and your camera. Please remember as well to bring it back in when you wish to speak, because often people put it on and they've forgotten to take mute off, myself included, but obviously people will remind us about that. In terms of speaking rights today, it's predominantly the first call is to committee members. They will have first priority, and then I will bring in guests if they wish to come in. I'm not expecting cabinet members to comment today. They are here really in a listening role unless they want to come in. I would ask that contributors, when they ask questions and make comments, that within reason the comments and questions are kept reasonably brief and to the point, and not to give officers 5 questions in one go, as it were, because it becomes quite difficult. When I ask you to speak, rather than going round today, there's so many people, if you could introduce yourselves. I'm Tudor Thomas, I'm chair of the committee, and I'm a councillor in Abergavenny. But when you come in to speak, for the benefit of the public, please give your name and where you represent and whether you're on the committee or not. I welcome comments as well from the non-voting members today, people like Maggie Harris and Peter Strong, etc. And I would obviously like to hear your views. But without further ado now, I go to the first item on the agenda, and it's apologies for absence. Have we had any, please, Hazel?
No, we haven't.
Okay, thank you for that. 2 declarations of interest. Shall we go as and when? Okay, so if you have a declaration of interest on a particular agenda item, please make it at that point. We now go to item 3 on the agenda, which is the homeless briefing report and the emerging proposal for future delivery of the homelessness. And I hand over now to Ian Bakewell, who is responsible for housing within Monmouthshire County Council. Thanks, Ian.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. I've prepared a presentation for today. So if you're happy for me to go through this presentation, okay. You see that?
Yes, that's fine.
Yeah. And just to be aware, this is a presentation that I have done for Adult Select as well. So the core of it is the same, but I have tweaked it in respect of young people. So as a starter for 10, really, to provide you with a bit of background and context, at the point of lockdown, Welsh Government asked us to ensure that nobody was sleeping rough or anybody at risk of sleeping rough. We were required to accommodate. Essentially, that was for public health reasons. And then they've issued subsequent requests to local authorities, basically saying that we now need to continue to support those in temporary accommodation. And basically, Welsh Government have changed their policy, or working towards a policy change in respect of homelessness. And they're using words, it's got to be, homeless should be brief, non-recurring, we should have a rapid rehousing, mechanism, and the language has changed as well. So they're talking about temporary homes, not temporary accommodation, and there's a big focus on improving the quality, increasing the range and type of accommodation available. And in terms of their vision, I don't think there'll be a lot of arguments about the principles that they're working to. But our challenge is how we actually get there. So this slide is really to give you a bit of an overview of our current situation. And even since I've done this, the figures have changed. We've actually got 117 people, or households, should I say, in temporary accommodation, albeit the vast majority of those are single people. We've got 96 single people at the moment, but we are having high numbers of young people presenting. When I say young people, that's anyone under 25, and we're accommodating what we consider as a considerable number in temporary accommodation at the moment. When I did this, there were 31 young people, single young people. We've actually got 14 families in, sorry, beg your pardon, four families in B&B at the moment. So that's a slight fall on what we've got. And we are having a regular number of referrals going through to our housing support. And in addition to those people that we're accommodating, there is a bit of a waiting list. And just this slide really, a bit of a busy slide. But what I was trying to demonstrate here is the impact that this has had on the housing options team. This slide's probably actually about a month old now, so again it's out of date. But when we did it, 364 offers of accommodation, and that is massive for the team. We've never experienced anything like it. So to be offering 13 offers a week is a big change for the team and has got implications. So I thought it'd be useful just to give you a feel of what we provide for young people in Monmouthshire at the moment. We've got our Solace Young Persons Hostels in Abergavenny and Chepstow, which I'm guessing most of you are aware, and that is our only specialist young persons accommodation for homelessness. The team's got a young persons accommodation officer who we appointed to specifically support young people in terms of homeless prevention. There is a question mark over that post at the moment, which does conflict with the current situation, but that post is funded through Housing Support Grant and is due to be decommissioned because there's actually been a low referral rate for that service. And basically that is because people that are presenting are already homeless. And I think that's the quirk of the situation at the moment. Most people coming through are actually homeless and we've not been able to prevent them. So we've also got a lady that works with families supporting young people to stay at home. That's the Flamai Family Mediation Service. There's Flamai Emphasis, which really focuses on young people who are in a needs sort of situation, but we've only got one of them, so the caseload capacity is very low, and we've got the Compass service, which is delivered through our youth service. right at the bottom there, we've got our supported lodgings, a service that we tried to get up and running a year ago, and that just unfortunately we were only able to get one host. So beg your pardon, I've got somebody at the door very quickly. So, very sorry. Oh, sorry about that. Challenges and risks that we've got at the moment. I think these are really relevant because of our operating at capacity in terms of accommodation. It's very difficult to place appropriately at the moment. We do get high risk people coming through for various reasons, and because we are at capacity, it is extremely difficult to place as we would want to. We're spending a lot of money at the moment, generally because of the use of B&B, but we also need to use security, and we've been providing meals to a number of people in local B&Bs. The security in the meals are being hopefully claimed back from Welsh Government, but they are significant sums of money in terms of this conversation. Our housing support programme at the moment is very out of date. It's the support that we've got in place at the moment is long-standing, and basically the programme needs to be recommissioned, but that's not scheduled until April 23. We've got some short-term funding from WAG in respect of various services, but those services are due to end in April 21, and as we sit here at the moment, those services will end. So there's no grant funding pending, and there's nothing built into the local authority's budget. But that's a worst case scenario, I believe. But that is the situation at the moment. We're dealing with a lot of high need applicants. Antisocial behaviour and criminal behaviour is an issue. We have had quite a lot of complaints from the police, not complaints, we've had complaints from neighbours, but some of our placements have impacted on the police. So again, we're in regular contact with the police in that regard. We're looking to the housing associations. Their role in this is extremely important, but they are saying to us they're only equipped to provide a low level and generic support. So they're looking to the council for assistance around support provision. And at the moment, vacancy rates are incredibly low. As we progress through COVID, I thought the rates would start to increase, but as we sit here again, the void levels are virtually non-existent. So that is an issue for us. As I touched on earlier, this has impacted massively on staffing and the team capacity. And just lastly, the future capacity of the housing support grant programme. The reason I've put that in there is because this is an out loud question. Will the housing support grant budget be sufficient for all of the needs in Monmouthshire? There's a bit of concern that as we change the programme, due to the level of need in Monmouthshire, there's a concern that the budget might be insufficient and result in people with lower needs being squeezed out. So these are the gaps we consider that we've got for Monmouthshire. As I said earlier, we've got Hill House and Woodstock operated by Solace, and the issue there is they are only able to take low need people. As a result, we will have to use B&B. Until recently, generally those B&B placements were out of the county, and we also need to use our own shared housing, which results in young people living with adults, and again, that's not ideal, particularly for younger young people. The Welsh Government guidance requires us to provide self-contained accommodation now. So we've got, as we sit here at the moment, we've got no self-contained emergency family accommodation. Our hostel in Monmouth is a shared property, and we're actually using that for another purpose. So, and again, just to give you a feel of the situation with the Solace properties, say in September we had a situation where Solace had 5 voids, but we were unable to place at least 10 young people because of their needs. So running alongside accommodation, these are our housing support gaps. Until recently, we've not been in a position where we've had temporary accommodation support. So literally when somebody walks through the door of whether it's a B&B or a shared property, support would kick in immediately. We didn't have resettlement. So if somebody moved to a permanent accommodation, again, the minute they got the keys, they've got support following them to that new address. Now, Pobble have been really good and supportive in that regard. So at the moment, we have got a temporary goodwill arrangement in place, and that should be formalised by April. We believe that, as I said, we're placing people in young people in B&B. We place people in shared housing. And we believe those individuals should have a dedicated accommodation support worker. At the moment, those people will get support, but they're from other mechanisms. And I say we think because of the age, they should have a specialist. But that's something we're keen on. And the bottom two, they're really more about adults rather than young people. But housing first, that is for people with real chronic issues. And in theory, there is scope to have a young person version. And no surprises. I no doubt you've picked up on this before about mental health support and substance misuse support. Again, we believe that that's not sufficient. So what have we been doing? Well, over the last 6 months, obviously we've been liaising closely with Welsh Government, and they've required us to put a transition plan in place. And the core of what I'm talking about today is Monmouthshire's transition plan. We've been supported by the council in terms of some additional staffing. And I can't emphasise enough how critical that has been. We've had to take some emergency measures, which I'm guessing some of you will have picked up on. We use Gilwyn Outdoor Education Centre during the summer. We're still using the Market Hall in Monmouth. There's been a lot of work in trying to get new B&Bs. And that picture there, that photograph there, that's a homeless pod. There's a company in Newport that are providing those. Again, that's something that we have been looking at. I mean, again, there's no desire to use those, but if we did, it would be a last resort. But I say there are conversations going on about that. And as I said, we're talking to our housing support grant colleagues in the partnership team and with various agencies around strengthening the housing support arrangements in Monmouthshire. And of course, it's the day job to be looking for new sources of accommodation. I'm not sure whether this is a helpful slide, but what I'm trying to emphasize with this slide is that homelessness is far bigger than my team. We work with social services. We've got the Compass service through the youth service. There's housing support providers. There's housing associations. And obviously it's so key that all parts of that system work effectively. And where I've put red and orange lines, we believe they are areas for improvement. And so there's a big focus on, or there will be a big focus on addressing those. So in terms of our headline proposals, a key part of this is, can we do any more to stop people coming through needing accommodation? So can we do more work upstream to prevent homelessness? And to make the point, really, we've got 3 housing options officers at the moment, and between them they've got over 200 open cases, and best will in the world, those staff haven't got the capacity to really work thoroughly with all of those cases. But that is an area that we do want to look at and will look at. Young persons accommodation. Obviously I've mentioned about solace accommodation, only being able to take low need. We desperately are now trying to secure accommodation that will assist both low need, medium and high need. And at the moment we're working with Pobble on a scheme in Chepstow. We were working with Mellin until a couple of months ago about a possible scheme in Abergavenny, but that fell through because the landowner wouldn't refuse to sell. And I've got to say, the project in Chepstow feels very fragile at the moment due to a number of emerging issues which are potentially pushing costs up. As I said earlier, we haven't got any self-consistency family accommodation, but we're working on trying to get some online. These photos here are it's Monmouthshire Housing's accommodation in Caldecott. What I'm trying to convey here is the quality of the accommodation that's coming through. Not only is it self-contained, brand new, refurbished, and will be a fantastic asset to our provision. So those particular photos, we're expecting to be able to start using those very quickly. And we've got a number of other proposals in the pipeline. Again, the challenge with this accommodation that's coming from housing associations is there could be cost implications for the local authority. I've put one there. We're working with Mellin on some accommodation in Chepstow, which could leave us with a cost of about £11,000. So again, there's another budget implication for the council. But what I would say about that cost is that it's cheaper than leaving people in B&B. And again, that slide's just really about a number of specific projects. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's specific 6 projects ongoing at the moment, which will deliver us additional accommodation if it all works out over the next year, really. This slide, I won't go into any detail on this, but because it's adult related, but we are working on a number of projects for adults. I've previously mentioned housing first accommodation. That's hobble on that, and multiple needs accommodation. We are looking at whether we can convert the former family hostel in Monmouth into accommodation for those with multiple needs. As I said, one of the big issues for us as a team is the impact that this is having on staff. Throughout the period from March to now, we have never had a full complement of staff, and that has impacted on our ability to be mobile and our ability to visit premises, which, when you've got complaints and inappropriate behaviour, that is absolutely critical. Because the staff have found that it's very fast paced, demand is relentless, highly reactive, and it has been very stressful for a lot of the team. And looking ahead, we think there'll be another spike in homelessness when furlough ends. And I think one of the other things which is easy to overlook, we've got a lot of individual initiatives that we are trying to work on. As per the previous slide, we've got all those accommodation projects, and like Monmouthshire lettings, we're trying to promote that, and we haven't got the staffing to really throw into that, and I think that's a big implication, certainly in the short to medium term. So, trying to wrap this up. As I said, we are looking to we want to convert our hostel in Monmouth, and we'd like to purchase another property. Again, we're probably talking relatively large sums of money in order to do that. And this slide doesn't include having a provision for the south. But I'm talking to finance colleagues and hopefully the cabinet about the possibility of this being of getting some additional capital funding. And as I said, staffing. I was invited. I've been asked to advise what I consider are the staffing needs for the team going forward, and that's unfortunately nearly another £200,000 that I consider that is needed. And that list of projects there are, I think they're a worst case scenario. They're the projects that we've got not going until April 2021, and it's assuming the worst, we don't get funding after April, and I suspect we will get something. So to leave you with what I consider our headlines, priorities, definitely saying we consider that the council's priorities should be young people. Definitely saying that multiple needs applicants should be a priority because of the levels of associated issues with that. And I'm asking if staffing can also be given a priority. And lastly, I suppose it's to leave an open-ended question. How effective is the council's homeless service at the moment in terms of council's priorities? Are we giving the best possible start in life? Are we contributing towards thriving and well-connected young people? And as we sit here, what will be the situation in the very short term? On the 1st of April next year, we will be still use B&B for young people. Will we get that additional 1-bedroom accommodation that we desperately need? Will we have the adequate housing support for young people? And will we be supporting those wider needs? So I very much hope we will. We've got some exciting plans, but it's a massive challenge for us at the moment, and I've got to say that the going is quite slow. But that's my presentation, and obviously happy to take any questions.
Okay, well, Ian, if you could sort of end the slideshow so we go back to the sort of main screen.
Sat down there.
Yeah, that's fine. First and foremost, look, thank you so much for coming today and taking us through all of the issues regarding housing, obviously in particular in terms of young people. I'm not going to say a great deal. It's something that's very close to my heart in terms of being on corporate parenting and having had good sessions with care leavers. But I'm going to go to questions and comments now from members of the committee, and I say I'll priority first to the committee. So I'll go to Councillor Martin Grocott, please.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Ian, for a report that, to be honest, at times reading that I could have wept. Thank to your staff as well. The pressure they must have been under, particularly since the pandemic burst into our lives, must have been tremendous. And I'd like to personally thank all your staff, as I'm sure other members of the committee do. One of the tests scrutiny is to check on whether services are improving or getting worse. I think that looking at the provision for young people and homelessness, it is difficult to come to any conclusion other than they are getting worse, and that with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, without steps being taken, will continue to get even worse. And I think one of the stark warnings in this report is that many of the applicants who come to housing as young people need both specialist accommodation and specialist support. And as the report says quite starkly, this isn't currently available. As a council, we aspire to give the best possible start in life. But from this, it seems that if you're an 18-year-old care leaver who needs accommodation, you are often simply almost thrown onto your own devices. You may be placed in shared accommodation with older people who may themselves have problems with drug or alcohol abuse or with criminal records. And it's an indictment of our council, I'm afraid, that this is happening. Looking at Ian's statistics, young people up to the age of 24, 31 in temporary accommodation, 27 with mental health issues, 12 currently in B&B, and 2 of those fairly recent school leavers. What are we doing to these people who we are who are identifying, often with severe needs, and simply, it appears to me, almost dumping them in situations where they are at very grave risk to themselves. And so I believe that as a committee, we need to add to the recommendations to actually enable support and effective provision to address, or try to address, the needs of these very vulnerable young people with immense difficulties who we just don't seem to be providing for at the moment. I would like, when we get to considering outcomes of this discussion, that we add to the recommendations that as a minimum, as a council, we need to support the homeless young people who need 24-hour help. We need a specialist officer for young people who has a background in mental health difficulties. And as the report said, we need a psychologically and trauma-informed service with clear systems to enable Ian's officers and ourselves as elected members to ensure that there is effective support from other agencies who have expertise in dealing with the needs of these very challenged and challenging young people. And as a second recommendation, I would like to ask that a cabinet member with specific responsibility in this area brings 6 monthly reports to the Children and Young People Select Committee that actually identifies the needs of these homeless young people and gives us a clear breakdown in the provision that is being made for them and the impact that the support is having on them. As things go as at present, I think it is a matter of luck that we have not had some very, very serious consequences. I think that I would dread a day when I hear on the news that someone has been murdered, someone has been involved in some horrific incident, and that we as a council are partly culpable because of the lack of support that we have provided. I know that sounds extremely strong, but I really do believe that your report, Ian, highlights our failings as a Children and Young People Committee, and indeed as a county council. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks. Ian, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor. I think the one thing I would say is that in everything that we do, Satan runs through all our processes and is at the forefront of what we do. And to be honest with you, a lot of the placements are linked to that. It's still a challenge. I'm not saying it's easy, but we are reasonably confident about the level of placements that we do that do reflect risk assessments and involvement of other agencies. I think the problem is, though, that we, so for example, in B&B for safeguarding reasons, and otherwise they would have gone into perhaps a shared accommodation, or perhaps they would have gone into solace. So I suppose the outcome has been not the ideal placement, but that placement has been informed by a risk assessment or a safeguarding consideration. And we will move people. We're moving people all of the time. Again, if issues arise or there's circumstances. So that, want to assure everybody that is an absolute priority for us. But obviously, working within the parameters that we've got is obviously the obviously extremely challenging.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Go now to Councillor Joe Watkins, sorry.
Thank you very much, Chair. Ian, thank you very much for your report. It was, yeah, as Martin said, it was really quite depressing reading and hearing, but there were some highlights I thought that I'd quite like to talk about. One, I was really encouraged by the change of language that Welsh Government is using to try and get people out from homelessness. So by talking about temporary homes rather, and actually trying to go for that idea that we are not accepting homelessness as an option. We are actually moving in the right direction. So we're not going to allow it. And the idea of a zero homelessness situation. So I think that was something that's great and lovely to see that it's coming through at council level. So I have two primary questions. One is, are they giving any funding to back up this this change of stance? So we're having to have a more proactive stance. And then the other one relates to my work in the food bank through the pandemic. So obviously we've supported as a food bank quite a number of times people who've been placed in temporary B&B accommodation. That B&B accommodation isn't our usual B&B accommodation. It's B&B accommodation that was brought into purpose during the pandemic. And I know from speaking to those B&B owners myself that they are hoping to go back to using their properties as regular B&Bs. So have we got things lined up to provide that emergency stopgap coming through the system? Because I'm a bit concerned that if they manage to go back to working as normal bed and breakfasts, they're not going to be able to provide the services that we've been using. And I've just realised, sorry, it's a third question as well. And then I'm delighted that Pobble have been providing a temporary arrangement again through my food bank work. That's been, I've really worked quite a lot with the Pobble workers and seen how that support has actually been really great. And it's going to be formalised by April. Is this actually something that's in progress? So we're very confident it's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so starting with the funding, we've so it's called Phase 2 homeless funding, and we've got funding for a number of short-term projects until April. So we've got revenue. So for example, we're funding a drug and alcohol worker through GDAS. Again, that's something new we've never done before. Brilliant, really. And again, the signs are really good for that. So the issue is what happens after the 1st of April. Welsh Government are, I've got to say, they're under a lot of pressure from my oppos in other local authorities and cabinet members in terms of next year. And albeit they're still saying there's nothing available, we've just got to wait and see. Because I've got to say, if there is no funding, there will be a big problem across Wales, not just Monmouthshire. And this is only a personal view, but I think there will be something, but we'll have to wait and see. And I know talking to Peter Davis, he's wondering whether there might be any additional funding in the settlement. Again, we'll know next month whether that's the case or not. In terms of B&Bs lining up, I mean, you're absolutely right. I know this is a conversation I've regularly had with Councillor Greenland. What if our B&Bs do turn around and say no? Yeah, that could be an issue. And I've got to say that if there was quite a number of them, it would be extremely difficult. There is actually a little bit of capacity in the system, and we have got assurances from certainly the majority to get us to Christmas, and I think some until April. And we can use Welsh Government hardship funding to help us on that, but it doesn't necessarily give us any guarantees. But I've got to be honest, I'm reasonably confident. I assume the B&B you're referring to is one in Caldecott, which is one of the smaller ones. And I think we could, if that did change use, I think we could accommodate that. But if there were a number, I think we would be in a difficult situation. And as I sit here at the moment, I haven't got any answer to that, and I would probably be asking for assistance to use something like Gilwyn again.
Okay.
And then the other question about Pobble, colleagues in the housing, in the partnerships team, Lynn Webber, they've done a lot of work with Pobble in terms of remodelling. Unfortunately, it has, in order to cement this arrangement, they have needed to decommission 2 services on the back of that. So there is a little bit of collateral on the basis of that, but obviously that's working on the basis of priorities. But in terms of Pobble, that is all due to kick in on the 1st of April, and I don't see any reason why that won't happen. But Pobble have been absolutely brilliant, been flexible, supportive, etc.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Go now to Councillor Louise Brown.
Yes, first of all, thank you for your report, Ian, and I'd like to say, thank you to you and your team for obviously the hard work that you've had to undertake in very challenging and stressful times. And, if you could pass that on, I'd be grateful. It is a shame that there is a lot of use of bed and breakfast accommodation, and I noticed that your slide actually said that it was more normally out of county. Have you found that because B&Bs are having less bookings at the moment because of COVID, that there is actually more availability, and will that prove a problem at a later stage? That's one of the first questions I've got. And the second question is, you've pointed out this youth need in terms of mental health support and substance misuse. Who do you think that the best, is this something that needs to be highlighted with Welsh Government about this particular need? And the third question is really to do with the funding. It seems as if you rely a lot on, bits and bobs of grants rather than comprehensive funding. And shouldn't the Welsh Government, if they're very keen to support homelessness, which I'm pleased to see that they are, shouldn't they be providing some more comprehensive funding so you're not always reliant on all of these grants? The fourth question is about the role of the different agencies, and I noticed that Mind had got a project that they were dealt with, but also, do you think that the social housing landlords, rather than having concentrating on generic clients, should be actually working more in this area as well, to provide the specialised accommodation and support that's needed? Because I would have thought they are supposed to be registered social landlords, and it's their duty, in a sense, to be looking at these social needs. And it seems as if could the registered social landlords step up to the mark a bit? Sorry, there's a number of questions there, but I hope I've tried to break them down a bit.
Yeah. B&Bs. We are in a bit of a luck situation. Say prior to COVID, we only had one B&B in the county that we were using, and the others were out of the county. But because of COVID and premises not being able to open for tourism, we've been able to benefit from that, and we've taken on quite a number of local B&Bs on the back of that. And as I said to Councillor Watkins, there may be a little bit of risk around this, depending on how things pan out as we go forwards. But I think there's a little bit of assurance, because we have no doubt propped up a number of businesses, so they've obviously got a considerable income that they otherwise wouldn't have got. So so that's that side of things. With regards written down GDAS. With regards to the specialist services and the support, taking the positives out of the situation, I think what this has really done has highlighted opportunities, it's highlighted the need, and it's highlighted the opportunities. And obviously with Welsh Government's changing view, and to be honest, they're probably using it as a little bit of an opportunity to, as you'd say, tackle rough sleeping, tackle youth homelessness, and reduce the selectiveness that we previously had in respect of who we would accommodate. So it looks as if we're heading to a situation where everybody can get homeless assistance in terms of accommodation. And I think most people would agree with that. And it's creating the opportunity to really think about the deficiencies and the support needs that we've got. And I say there's no easy answers and quick fixes at the moment. But Welsh Government do. I think that is definitely on Welsh Government's horizon. They understand and know the challenges that all local authorities have got, and they're well aware about the issues about drug abuse, antisocial behaviour, etc., etc. So I do think that will be a key consideration for them going forward. But I say that there's nothing definite at the moment. But we do talk to all local authorities have been issued with a relationships manager, and so our dialogue with Welsh Government is a lot more regular. It's probably more informal as well, but I take the positives out of the informality because it's about relationships and getting to know each other. So I think it's going in the right direction, but I say there's nothing definite I can present at the moment. Your last point about the role of other agencies, particularly the housing associations, I mean, you're absolutely spot on. As we sit here, our social landlords are massive partners in this, and so far they are being supportive, but they are making the point about, as you've picked up on, that they're only geared up for low need applicants, and I think that I'm hopeful that they will change and that they will be more aligned with the actual reality of the situation. At the moment, they are looking at our housing support grant programme, and we're having those conversations now. How that will unravel as we go along, I'm not sure, but certainly from a regulatory perspective, I do know that Welsh Government have got this on the radar as well, and that they ask us for feedback about whether housing associations are supporting us or not. But I think I'm reasonably confident as we sit here at the moment about our housing association partners. But there's still lots of conversations to be had.
Yeah,
okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Councillor Brown. Any other members of the committee wishing to speak? Can't see any hands up. I go now then to one of our guests, Labour leader, Councillor Dimitri Petruni.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Ian, for that sobering report, although not unexpected, to be honest. Two queries from me that were, I think, hinted at, but not explicitly talked about, unless I missed it, was the strategic piece around, I know you're focused on more immediate frontline concerns. Thinking around the strategic housing piece in relation to this new kind of regional board, whatever they're going to call themselves, and about how that alleviates in the long, because and at the end of the day, we're only going to solve this in the long term by building more homes, more affordable homes. I mean, everything else is just firefighting. The only way you really deal with this is to build homes in the right places that people can afford to buy. So that strategic piece, I mean, is that been on the back burner with you because your team's so stretched and focused, which is understandable? I'm just wondering your input and the housing team's input, or the housing team's family input into that piece. And secondly, into the council's piece around the poverty plan and the PSB. So the PSB meeting last week was very helpful, and we heard the poverty strategy plan. I forget what it's precisely called, but it talked about bring other PSB members in support of tackling the systemic issues around poverty. And you know that I think housing is the key linchpin to all of that. And I wonder, I mean, there's a lot of talk about Welsh Government here, and they're the go-to, and that's understandable. But what about the health service? And I think around the mental health point, I mean, the health service have the expertise. They have better funding than us. It is a big driver of poverty, both a cause and a symptom. What our discussions are we having in relation to that, the PSB, to Jude, about bringing that resource in from other PSB members rather than just Welsh government, if that makes any sense? Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, again, Councillor, you're spot on. We, this has got to be a whole systems approach, and the input of all parts of those system are key. And you're right, Dimitri, that again, this has massively highlighted the importance of new homes, and we have had that conversation with internally, and to be honest, I was at informal cabinet yesterday, and that conversation came up again. So that is obviously something that I'm very interested in, and obviously I think it's key that we're part of this, because I say the concern going forward is obviously new homes coming online, whatever source they are. So so we are linking in with that, and so I don't know whether Councillor John wants to add to that. With regards to the poverty plan, again, yes, Jude and I have made connections with regard to that. I have asked that the poverty plan. I've made the suggestion that homelessness is not a distinct priority for her plan, but I'm suggesting that homelessness and housing is a theme that needs to run through all aspects of that plan, because as you rightly said, and I believe this, I believe you get your housing right and your other benefits will follow. So I'm working closely with Judith on that, and what the next step for me in that regard is to go away again and probably talk to other housing organisations and look to identify whether there are more opportunities where we can link with other agencies to support this agenda. And I'll use one as by way of an example. So many of the young people, particularly single people that we're working with, have got nothing behind them, and so for example, have bank accounts, saving, looking ahead in terms of perhaps securing their own accommodation down the line. So they're the types of conversations that I'm interested in having. And then the role of health, again, what this situation has thrown up is that a lot of the support needs are not, well, they're over and above housing. You know, our job is housing support, not medical support. And we are currently accommodating quite a number of people where medical circumstances are completely appropriate. And again, if we can facilitate support with that, we will. So I personally have had conversations with a number of different sections of the community mental health team. We've now got a housing person working within the organisation. So that is a go-to person. So and like the work that we're doing with GDAS at the moment, some really interesting, because again it's new to me. I'm not overly familiar with drug and alcohol works, but again we can see the opportunities. So we've started those conversations, and there's more to be had really. So, but yeah, health definitely we want at the table.
Okay.
Can I just come back in on that, Chair? Just a quick one.
Yes. Yeah.
I had a recent case of a constituent, a resident, who was asking about housing situation, but it came rapidly clear it was tied up with alcohol and drug addiction. And, you know, as a counsellor, I try to be empathetic, but I am not equipped at all to deal with people who are really struggling with these level of problems. And it struck me that you and your team face this issue daily. To what extent training support have you been given to, because you're housing officers, right? What support have you been given to deal with people with a lot of problems, particularly around addiction?
Well, what would very relatively little, to answer you truthfully. Staff will have been through some like drug awareness training in the past, but that's probably relatively light touch and needs refreshing. I think Councillor Graucott picked up on it in the report that we want to work towards a psychologically and trauma-informed service, and that for me is about the whole service being more in tune with this, being more aware of this, being more sensitive to this, and part of this will be about training and thinking differently. And I think perhaps there's elements of the service that are perhaps I've described them perhaps as traditional, and we want to. We've got ambitions ourselves anyway, regardless of the Welsh Government guidance, to operate the homeless service in a very different way. And I think this is this type of area is a really good example where we need to support staff around that to recognise it, understand how to deal with it, and have that greater exposure with those services that can provide that dedicated support. And I say the GDAS worker that we've got working with us, again, it's a completely new relationship for some of the team, well, for all of the team, not some, and it's good stuff. It is good stuff, and I say it is in its infancy, but it's those sort of areas that I'm really positive about in terms of going forward and being clearer about what is needed going forward.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Maureen Powell.
Thank you, Chairman. I was going back to something that was just said just a few minutes ago about the lack of housing that we have. And one of the main problems we've got It happens time and time again. And I expect the other members of planning committee have also had an email over the last few days from a group protesting about areas going into the LDP. Is that when we want to build houses, especially when we get a place where you've got a high percentage of low-cost housing, you get the public up in arms protesting. In the one case at Raglan, where they went to the Welsh Government and got the planning thrown out, where there were several houses there, a good proportion, that were going to be low cost. It's very difficult. I don't know what we can do to persuade the public that we do need these houses, and we're not going to destroy all the countryside. There's a lot of countryside out there that will still be there, but it is a block all the time. And the other thing is that even when we've given planning permission and got it through for some places, the developers seem to hold back. I suppose they're worried that they won't make their money, and I mean, don't get going. And I think this is a problem as well. I know it probably wouldn't answer the single people, and also we need to have amongst housing, we need to have properties where you can have single flats for people, for the youngsters, because they don't need a house. What they need is just an apartment or something like that. And I don't know what's the answer, really. I don't know whether Ian's got the answers.
I think we're going in more to planning issues there, really.
Yes, but it's still...
To be honest, rather than, CYP. I don't know if you want to come back on that, Ian, or should we...
The only thing to say there is that one-bedroom accommodation is the emerging priority. And, so... that's our focus, really, and obviously young people will benefit from that.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Anybody else wishing to speak now before we come to an end on the housing item? No? Well, again, Ian, thank you to you and your team for all the work that you've done, and please pass on our thanks to them in extremely challenging times. And it's been in a sense an eye-opener this morning in terms of what we've heard. Do you want to come in, Councillor Grocott, or not?
I just wanted, before we move the recommendations, I want to bring in those two additional recommendations. So that's why my hand was raised, Chair.
Yeah, okay, thanks. In terms of the recommendations, looking at your options, and unless somebody stops me here, option one that you recommend is the recommended option is to continue to develop the phase 2 transition plan, identify resources, continue to develop individual proposals to increase the scope and quality of the council's homeless service, which meet the requirements of Welsh Government. This option includes a proposal to recommission the housing support grant programme in 2023. I assume we all, fully support that. And also the recommendation, two recommendations that Councillor Grocott put forward, that homeless people, they need 24 hours. We need a specialist officer who's an expert in mental health issues, so that they are there to give that support. And the second recommendation is that a cabinet member with responsibility for this area attends CYP on either on a 6-month basis, which has been recommended by Councillor Grocott, and they also give information about what is happening in terms of where we are in terms of the problems. So are people happy with
Chair, before we move to a vote, there was rather more to my first recommendation.
Yeah, go on then, Mark.
Certainly, I was saying that we should recommend a specialist officer to support homeless young people who need 24-hour help. But beyond that, also a specialist officer for young people with mental health problems. And thirdly, a psychologically and trauma-informed service with clear systems that provide professional external agency support to our housing team. And these are all things that have emerged from the report. And then the second recommendation, as you see, is that on a 6-monthly basis, a cabinet member comes, and actually report on the specific support that's been given to each of the young people and the effectiveness of that support.
Okay. Are people happy to go with a sort of extended recommendation given by Councillor Grocott? I see no one dissenting. In terms of today,
sorry, Chair.
Sorry, Councillor Brown.
Could I ask for some feedback from Ian Bakewell on the recommendations that are being made? Because obviously, you know, we've heard about the report here about the difficulties of funding and everything else. So I'd like some feedback on, you know, what the officer concerned thinks about those recommendations. The third recommendation of, you know, the cabinet member coming every so often to report, but you know, obviously the health service have only got one person, I think, who's involved in housing on the mental health side, and you know, I just wonder how realistic the second recommendation is, and I'd just like some feedback from Ian on that, because of the difficulties that the report has highlighted in relation to funding, because there's no point in making recommendations that aren't realistic, really. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Brown. Do you want to come in very briefly, Ian?
Yeah, well, I think it's completely appropriate for you as a committee, and similar with that, similarly with adults, to be monitoring the situation. So I think it would be completely reasonable probably to receive a report perhaps April or something. That's about 6 months, and because we'll be in a better position to update you in terms of, you know, emerging funding, whether it's depending on whether it's the local authority or whether it's WAG or whatever. That's absolutely fine. The points about specialist officers, the psychologically informed service, etc. Again, that's supportive to us as a team. My only caveat with that is a lot of this will be resource dependent. So and all of the progress that we make will be staffing related, and if we continue as we are at the moment in terms of staffing, it will be very difficult, because all the focus, as you've all picked up, is literally reacting to what's happening on the ground, and us being able to, as opposed to us being able to really put good quality time aside to plan. But I say I have been asked to provide a staffing report to Francis O'Brien as Chief Officer. So that is something that is in the wings. But I'm comfortable with everything that Councillor Grocott has said.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to check with you. I mean, obviously, ideally, you know, it sounds like more officers are needed, but I wanted to know how realistic you thought it was. But thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Brown. Okay, other than that, we've had numerous sort of interesting and pertinent questions, but obviously the main issues we've now recorded as the recommendations, and thanks to Councillor Grocott for those two very important additional ones. The one thing I would say is, in terms of children and young people, it is crucial for their development, not just giving them a start, but their ongoing education and development is the provision of decent, affordable housing. And as I think Ian Bakewell said earlier on at some point, it's firefighting in terms of if there's nowhere for these people to move on to, you know, it's almost like being on a roundabout. But again, once again, Ian, thanks for your help this morning, and for giving such a clear input. And it's something that we're obviously going to come back to in terms of hopefully having an update now every 6 months.
Chair, okay. Chair, I didn't, sorry, in relation to Councillor Brown and Grocott's comment, again, just so the committee is clear, I'm required to take I'm doing a cabinet report. There's a cabinet report due to go in January. Again, that will be focused on resources. So again, so we'll be in a better position to come back to Councillor Graucott's queries.
Yes.
Hopefully in January. So.
Okay. Well, once again, thank you very much, Ian. And we now move on to the next agenda item, which is item agenda 4, which is a report on additional learning needs. And there has been, I'm afraid, some error with the cover report not being on the website. This has now been rectified by Democratic Services, and members have been emailed a report, and there's also a link there. But I hand over now to start the ball rolling to the Chief Officer for Children and Young People, Will McLean. He's also going to be assisted by colleagues. Hand over to Will McLean, please.
Excellent. Good morning. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, committee. I'm really pleased to be able to bring this paper to you this morning, and also, of course, to bring with me its key authors. So I will introduce them in just a second. But I think just to say ahead of that this is a really important meeting for us, because this is a key part of our consultation process around how we respond to this very dynamic situation around additional learning needs within Monmouthshire and across the country as a whole, with new legislation and increasing demand being kind of key components of that. So my colleagues who will present the report today are Jackie Elias, and Jackie is our Principal ALN officer, so she's responsible for all of the work with regards to the statutory side of provision for those children with additional learning needs. And I'd also like to introduce Dr. Morwenna Wagstaff and Dr. Lucy Doyle, who are our two principal educational psychologists who have been working with Jackie to design and think through what this approach to additional learning needs across Monmouthshire will be. I think that it's really important, actually, that we understand the timing of this report coming to committee. We are in the middle of the Additional Learning Needs and Tribunal Act being implemented. Those discussions are taking place at the moment with Welsh Government as to really understanding what that looks like in the coming period. Clearly, we've worked through the challenges of COVID, and we will kind of see where that gets us in the coming weeks, because I think that will be a movable feast to a certain extent. But I'm grateful to the Chair for raising the issue about the cover report. There was a cover report which drew out some of the key aspects of the strategy. I know that you received the strategy document ahead of this meeting. So I don't want to say any more really at the moment. I'm going to hand over to Jackie in the first instance, and Jackie and the team will take you through the paper and we'll be happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you, Will. Bore da, and good morning, committee. It's very nice to be here. As Will has said, this is the document you received is one that's developing and evolving. I think it's really important to emphasise that this strategy document is being co-produced with colleagues in school and the local authority. We really welcome the opportunity to share this with you today and gain your views on the work we've done so far, and benefit from your thoughts on aspects we can develop further, and we look forward to that discussion later on. As Will's already mentioned, the development of this document is taking place at a time of really significant change in the world of special educational needs. Within the report, you'll see SEN is the current terminology, but we're moving towards a brave new world of ALN, and that's what we'll be referring to throughout these discussions as we're getting ourselves ALN ready for when the Act will be implemented in September 2021, although, as Will said, some of the timelines around some of the implementation may change over the coming months, but we've been reassured by Welsh Government that the main aspect of the implementation will take place in September. Now, this is going to have major implications, not only for the local authority, but for schools. So when we were developing the strategy document, we felt it was really important to include elements that supported the wider provision in terms of special educational needs, so building the capacity of mainstream schools as well as our specialist resource-based provision. My colleagues Morwenna and Lucy are now going to take you through the report. So Morwenna, I think you're next in this game of tag. So over to you.
Thank you, Jackie, and good morning, everybody. Yeah, I'm Morwenna Wagstaff. I'm one of the principal educational psychologists and wellbeing lead in Monmouthshire. I've just been asked this morning, oh, sorry, I've lost you for a second on my screen, to say a few words really about the development of the draft document and proposed strategy, and to highlight what we feel are some of the benefits. Our role over the last year or so has been to work closely with Jackie and the specialist teachers from the SNRBs, as well as Elencos in schools and others, to develop a clear vision for our children and young people with additional learning needs that is equitable and aspirational, and one where children and young people and their families are kept central. The focus is on developing the existing ALM provision within Monmouthshire to drive forward a consistent, equitable, high quality and inclusive educational offer across the county. The strategy highlights the aim to fully utilise and continue to enhance the specialist skills and experience already in Monmouthshire, to develop excellent provision for children and young people with ALN in our mainstream schools, early years settings and our SNRBs. We are an inclusive authority and highly value the right of all children and young people to be educated within their local communities as far as is possible. The benefits of inclusion for children and young people with ALN, as well as those without and their communities, are very well evidenced in research. Underpinning the strategy is the importance of enhancing, as Jackie mentioned, the provision for all children and young people with ALN in its broadest sense within our mainstream schools and settings. So a significant part of the strategy is about developing the capacity of our mainstream schools and settings to better meet the needs of children and young people with a wide and varied range of ALN, including those with emotional, mental health and neurodevelopmental needs, which are prevalent in Monmouthshire. The development of the SNRB professional network group that is outlined in the strategy has been a powerful driving force in the evolution of a specialist provision and outreach team. The strategy highlights the intention of having the SNRBs as ALN centres of excellence that will then be best placed to support children and young people effectively within their clusters and their local schools through a robust multi-agency local authority model. I'm going to hand over to Lucy now, who's going to highlight some of the current work within the 4 work streams that have been outlined in that strategy.
Thank you, Morwenna. Hi everybody, I'm Lucy Doyle. So this strategy aims to develop a sustainable and resilient ALN provision in Monmouthshire, and as such we have 4 ambitious work streams to achieve this. So I'm aware that not everybody might have had the draft strategy, and that gives some focused detail around each work stream. But we have 4 work streams. So our work stream A is aims to develop more effective and equitable ALN services in Monmouthshire. Work stream B focuses on provision which places a clear emphasis on early intervention, including in the early years. Work stream C focuses on specialist provision which is appropriately staffed and resourced and has the capacity to meet Monmouthshire's current and projected needs for children with complex needs. And work stream D, which aims to develop consistent, high quality, inclusive educational offer that can meet the needs of children and young people, including those with ALN in preschool, mainstream and specialist provisions. I could talk probably all day and passionately about the work that's taking place within those work streams, but I'd like to highlight some of the work that's taking place within work stream C, which is around developing our resource bases as centres of excellence, and which are consistent and equitable across the local authority to meet our current and projected needs. So as part of this piece of work, we formed a professional network group, which has developed a shared vision. So far, this is focused on a number of areas, including assessment, resources, skills and outreach to our mainstream schools. So we've completed a work skills audit to allow us to focus on appropriate high-level specialist training for staff within our provisions, and which is coordinated at a local authority multi-agency level. So we've agreed, considered and agreed coordinated interventions which we're all committed to, for example, attention autism and step back training, and in turn those skills and interventions will feed into our mainstream schools. We've agreed a consistent approach to pupil assessment, which is hugely important, and committed appropriate resourcing to those. And each provision has looked at the resources which will support their teaching and learning. So in particular, the sensory environment and the sensory provision for those children, sensory rooms, are being developed in line with their needs and the needs of the children there. We've looked at outreach, so developing robust processes for outreach into our mainstream schools, so supporting our mainstream schools to meet the needs of particular children and young people, but which in turn will strengthen their skill set and capacity longer term. That particular piece of work obviously feeds into workstream D, which is around strengthening and improving the capacity of staff to make appropriate adjustments and meet the needs of children and young people with additional learning needs in mainstream settings. This is hugely important work and is multifaceted. There's been a focus on strengthening local authority processes and our psychologically informed training offer into schools. So there's a number of areas of focus, in particular ASD, which we know is an important area of need in Monmouthshire, around understanding behaviour challenges, developing whole school approaches to mental health and well-being, strengthening understanding around trauma and attachment needs of our children and young people. So a number of training opportunities there. So as I've said, the draft strategy gives detail to each of those work streams, and there's a lot of work happening within those work streams. Hopefully I've given you a small flavour of some of the exciting work that's taking place within our work streams, and some detail around those.
Thank you, Lucy, and thank you, Morwenna. Now, I know that the report is something that you're probably reading as you're listening, but if, as a way forward, would you, we can go through the draft strategy document, or we can take questions from members of the Select Committee, whichever you feel is the most productive.
Okay, Jackie, thanks for that. Unless somebody's going to stop me, I think probably the most sort of productive use of our time now is to go to sort of questions and responses and probably clarification. Would you be happy with that, Will?
Yeah, absolutely, Chair. I think just for clarification, I think the draft strategy was circulated, I think, on Friday. It was the cover report that was out slightly later.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Okay. I don't know, if, Joe, have you got your hand up, or is it, as it were, an old hand from the previous item? Okay. Who would like to go first in terms of asking questions or making any comment? I've got a hand up now from Councillor Martin Grokert. Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just doing the necessaries to get my visage available to everybody. It probably won't surprise anybody that I've got some questions about special needs provision. But I have to say that I welcome this report and the documentation. And I think that as councillors, we should fully support this idea that the most important things are early identification and then provision in a local school wherever possible, while accepting, of course, that in some cases that won't be possible. But it's the ideal that we aim at. And flowing from that then, the first query I've got is about the schools where additional provision will be based. And going back many years, there has been what used to be called units in schools. And in the dim and distant past, when I still had hair and was responsible for running these things, they were very much run centrally by the local authority and placed in our school. I think we're in a very different world now. And so I think that we would all agree that the additional provision should be seen very much as part of the school. And so I wonder what support the authority will be able to give to ensure that those teachers who head up this additional provision would be seen very much as members of the management team of the school, so that additional provision is woven seamlessly into what the school offer is. While at the same time, I think the authority has a duty to those teachers providing the specialist support that they can meet with colleagues in similar circumstances with the professional support available from the local authority, so that they are not feeling that they're on their own, isolated in a local school. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that since my days as an education officer, the provision of education in the medium of Welsh has grown tremendously in Monmouthshire. I remember vividly the day when Gwent was dragged to the High Court and told very clearly that if a child educated in the medium of Welsh needed speech therapy, the speech therapy would be provided through the medium of Welsh. At that point, we did not have any Welsh-speaking speech therapists. That's a very major need, particularly in primary schools. I wonder if you could assure me that we now do have Welsh-speaking language therapists. Third thing is that and this is quite a specific thing, the additional provision based at Derry View. Currently assessment, but looking under the proposals to expand, and would take some extremely challenging young people. In 2024, the proposal is that Derry View closes and will be reopened as a new school on the site of the secondary school in Abergavenny, and that the Welsh medium school will move into the site. Is the intention that that additional provision proposed for Derry View would remain there, would have very challenging English-speaking pupils in a school where the medium of education is Welsh? I think that that's something that I would need some very clear clarification on. And my final point is that I started off by talking about the importance of picking up as early as possible. The new legislation will see very clear responsibilities from birth through to 24. And that's been the case in England for several years now. And in my professional life, I saw that create considerable difficulties. On several occasions, I led inspections of education provision that also provided accommodation and provision for adults. And I would be joined on those inspections by a social care inspector. Very often at that handover from school to adult life, there were real problems. I think that once we have that statutory duty to provide seamless care through to the age of 24, what can you tell me about the way that that transition between school life and adult and hopefully working life can be seen through seamlessly? So thank you very much. You're still smiling at me, so I hope that means I haven't thrown you too much. Thank you very much indeed.
Who would want to start on this? Will, do you want to start, or is?
If I could, Chair, thank you. So, Councillor Groker, I think I'll pick up the third part of your four-part question, and then I'll hand over parts 1, 2, and 4 to the rest of the team to answer, as that's more in their areas of expertise, clearly. With regards to the developments and the planned developments in Abergavenny in the new 3 through 19 school, it is very much our hope that we will be able to create within the new 3 through 19 school a SNRB facility take children from 3 to 19. and provide that continuation of support right the way through. So that's our plan. It wouldn't see an English medium SNRB remain on the Derryview site, which, as you say, we were very, very hopeful will be occupied by Yscola Beni, and that's a key part of our plan. So we're looking at a new provision which will enhance the provision and the capacity within Monmouthshire. At the moment, in the north, we see we're beginning to really work on an understanding with our parents and with our schools that there should be a continuation of education from when children start in Over Mono, flowing through into Monmouth Comprehensive School. There should be a continuation of that special education between those two schools, and the same in the south of the county between Pembroke and Caldicot. It gives us a great opportunity in Abergavenny to do that on a single site, and that's an opportunity we're really hoping to develop as those plans are developed with stakeholders across many, many different sectors for the new school there. I'll pass over now to the others who will answer the other parts of your questions, but thanks for the questions.
Thank you, Councillor Grocott. I'm going to talk about the point you made around where our resource bases are placed and the links we have with the schools that they're placed in. I think one of the challenges we've got actually with the new Act coming up is that currently we call them special needs resource bases. Well, special needs, as you know, is not going to be the terminology we're going to be used going forward. So we're actively thinking of a new name and a rebranding, if you like, of our specialist provision going forward, which is again part of the exciting developments that we're part of. I think the point you made is really, really important. It's, you know, schools that host our resource provision are hosts, but they must work in partnership with the local authority, and it's a very strong and relationship that we need to have. As we've already alluded to in previous discussions around our special needs network or professional network group, that's been happening for now over a year. We started that in June, July 2019, and that is a really important strand in the development of the relationships that we have and the codependency that we have. These schools are providing specialist education for our most vulnerable and complex children, and therefore we have to have the quality assurance from a local authority that that is the best education that these children can have, and that the staff in those settings are appropriately supported through training and other initiatives in order to do their job. So the culture and ethos of the school that the bases are existing is also extremely important. So, you know, Joe Child and Helen Hampson, for example, are part of our professional network group, as is Hayley Page, assistant head from Monmouth. It's a critical relationship, and one that we've developed, and it's growing, and it's extremely positive. So we talk in those meetings, we talk about our virtual special school because we've got over 150 places already across the local authority, and it's really important, as Lucy alluded to, that there's this consistency in practice and a consistency in our vision of what we want from these resource bases. ALN Centres of Excellence is what, you know, we are driving towards as part of this strategy. We want them to be absolutely second to none in terms of what they offer our children and young people, and we can only do that by working in partnership. So I hope that gives you some assurance that we're on the right track in relation to that, into that relation to that part of the question. In terms of provision through Welsh, it is an ongoing issue around the number of, in fact, it's not just speech and language therapists, it's educational psychologists, it's a whole range of professionals within South East Wales who can actually deliver interventions through the medium of Welsh. And in fact, it's a subject of discussions within our South East, our consortia ALN inclusion group as to how we can address this. And in fact, because we know at the moment we don't have any, for example, Welsh-speaking education psychologists, but actually we know that there are Welsh-speaking education psychologists in Blaen y Gwent, for example, that I think have got 2 or 3. So some of the discussions that we need to have in order to make sure that our children in Welsh medium education are getting support through their first language, is that we look at how we can use a regional resource maybe to fill that gap, whilst we obviously very proactively look for colleagues either to learn Welsh or recruit people who are Welsh speaking. So I think with regard to Welsh speaking speech and language therapists, I'm not, because we don't at the moment have that I'm aware of in Aneurin Bevan. I'm sure there are Welsh, there is one Welsh, I got Morwenna reassuring me there's one Welsh speaking speech and language therapist, so she's probably got her work, or he's probably got his work cut out. But it is something that we will continue to identify as a priority through our WESP, and going forward, obviously, the more children there are within Welsh medium education in Monmouthshire, the more we'll need to develop that. Morwenna, can I go to you with regard to the question around the early identification, early years and post-16, please?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, just to confirm, I have recently done some work alongside a Welsh-speaking speech and language therapist in Aneurin Bevan, so I know that there is definitely one, but they are rare. Yeah, with regards to your question, Councillor Gray, around the early intervention and particularly the early years and then the post-16, I think if I take early years first, from a Monmouthshire point of view, I think we're in quite a strong provision with the ALN reform, because as you're aware, we've had dedicated early years educational psychologists for a number of years now. And those processes around supporting preschool children, sometimes really early, depending how early their needs are picked up, supporting them at an early stage in their nurseries or preschool settings has been in place for some time. And I think, I think the sort of processes around supporting through a broader local authority early years ALN team, which encompasses other professionals in that group around identification and ensuring provision is in place, is actually fairly strong in Monmouthshire at the moment, and we hope isn't going to unfurl under the ALN reform. With regards to the post-16, that is a new sort of challenge for Monmouthshire, because obviously up until now the remit has been to children with statements until they're 19, and that is going to increase. There's been a lot of work recently with this, and myself and Hayley Page, who's the assistant head in Monmouth Comp, are actually taking the post-16 response forward. And actually this Friday, alongside Jackie Elias and other local authority colleagues, as well as representations from colleague Gwent and Careers Wales, we are holding our first post-16 transition steering group, and where we are piloting the new sort of transition protocol that was trialled in Torfaen, a Gwent-wide protocol. We're trialling that in Monmouthshire, in Monmouth Comp this year, in the hope that then in September we'll have some real local understanding of need, and we will have adapted the protocol to meet Monmouthshire's 4 comprehensive needs and those links with the colleges and post-16 and work placements, so that we will be in a better position to support children with additional learning needs, or young people beyond the end of school. The interesting piece around that is actually there's almost more of a focus on children who don't necessarily have current statements of SEN, and it's about picking up all those other children who might have additional learning needs, but they're being met within the mainstream provision with additional support. So it's about ensuring that we target the right children, because obviously those with statements of special educational need, for example, will already have very robust transition plans into post-16. So really interesting piece of work, and yeah, we're in evolution. Meeting 1 is this Friday, so I can feedback at a later point.
Okay,
that answers the question.
Yeah, thanks. I've got to say something about Welsh medium. I am a Welsh speaker, and 2 of my children went through Welsh medium education in Ysgol Gymraeg y Fenni. And I'm glad that Councillor Martin Grogan had raised the issue about the movement of the unit from Derryview site to King Henry. But obviously it is crucially important, and I speak as a Welsh speaker, that children, in terms of language support with speech and language, or whether it's psychological issues, particularly young children, they do need access then to a Welsh medium, a proficient Welsh medium practitioner. And I'm not for 1 minute putting down learners, and the learners are probably more competent than I am in the language. But on the other hand, there is a need for that, and obviously Welsh medium is burgeoning. I was one of the campaigners with Gwent to get Ysgol Gymraeg Efenni, so I feel very strongly about that. Go now to Councillor Louise Brown.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say I had a read through the strategy, although the strategy that we received before, and obviously we've only just got the covering report. I appreciate that the direction of travel for additional learning needs is to keep them in mainstream schools and to support them in that particular way. But there are pupils who can't be supported in that way, and we have a significant number of children who have to go to specialist schools, and we don't actually have a specialist school in Monmouthshire. We're the only county in Gwent that doesn't have a specialist school, and the Cabinet indicated previously that they would be looking at a special school for Monmouthshire covering autism and also special educational behaviour disorders. Obviously they're all going to be called ALN or have a different term as the legislation on this progresses. But I was disappointed to see that the report, although it states about invest to save, we spend millions on paying for either independent schools or other local authorities to cover children who can't be educated in mainstream because of their particular needs. And I don't think that this report really addresses that concern. The other issue that looking at the draft consultation document itself was that I found it very difficult to actually find the numbers of pupils who were in each particular category. We had percentages and various other things. I mean, there is a table, I think, on page 7, and it shows that the number with statements going from across the years to 2019 was decreasing. And then we've got this covering report, which has got different figures again. I would have thought that the number of people with statements, because of this individual development plan and the idea of this, and you're not needing to have a medical assessment, I would have thought those with statements would have increased, but there seems to be a peak. Now I've seen these figures at the last minute this morning or half an hour ago. Basically, there does seem to be an increase on the statement of pupils, and I'd like some comment on that. But my main concern is, if I've read all of these reports, I've no idea really who's in each category, and some of the comments that some of the things you use, like SNRB, I presume is special needs, but I'm not sure what RB is. You know, I think you need to make the report more comprehensive so that the you know, obviously the school action plus and the statements, and there's so many different terminologies that are used. I think it's important that people are able to read this report and know exactly what's being talked about. So my main focus is basically the Cabinet were talking about looking at a special school for Monmouthshire, rather than people having to travel long distances out to other schools. So I'd like some comment on that particular aspect. And I know from looking at this that, you know, that there was millions spent on this, so invest to save would seem appropriate. With the school programme at the moment, I mean, Welsh schools have 100% capital contribution to building, and I think that special schools from memory have somewhere between 75% and 85% capital provision. So I'd like your comments on that, because you know, I appreciate that you're looking at mainstream, but you don't seem to have properly covered the pupils who do need to be educated, and you know, they should be educated within the Monmouthshire setting where possible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Brown. Who would like to lead on that, please? Well,
I think I'll take much of that if I can, please, Chair.
Yeah, by all means.
Thank you. And Councillor Brown, I think my first recollection was that the commitment in the last stages of the discussions around Mountain House was that the Cabinet committed itself to ensure that provision was made. And I don't want to sound like I'm kind of moving around in semantics, but provision isn't necessarily the same as a school. And I think that's important for us to recognise.
My memory was that it was a school, and I'll check on formal reports. But
yeah, we'll check on the. But I think you know, it's always been about provision, and I think the other important point to note is that, and you made reference to the fact that we now are the only authority without a special school. We had one very specific type of special school when Gwent was disaggregated into the 5 local authorities. So when Gwent was in existence, clearly there were general schools or more generalist special schools situated in different parts of the former Gwent area. But I think one of the things which we have to think about, and I think, you know, we've seen in recent days or weeks actually the opening of the Grange Hospital in Llanfechffer, and I think that model is a really good way for us to think about how we're seeking to provide our support for our learners with additional learning needs within Monmouthshire, because as a small local authority in terms of population, there will always be children whose needs are at such a level, whose needs are so demanding, that they will always have to go to a different setting to receive that level of care and support. That's exactly the argument we saw presented by Nair and Bevan with regards to Neville Hall and to the Royal Gwent, about how do you bring together that level of expertise to be able to provide for a very small number of people who will present with that need. So I think it's important that we have that in mind. And I think that what we're seeking to do through the approaches that have been set out in the papers is to create capacity. There's 155 places at the moment across the authority of space for children with complex learning needs. So if you were to visit one of our SNRBs, over Mono, we're about to do some significant remodelling work on to make it even more effective, to match the great practice that's been undertaken there professionally. If you were to go and see that, you would see that the children supported in those schools are children that you would perceive to be of a very high need. The same in Pembroke and the same in Monmouth and Caldicot. We're seeing children who have to have access to changing facilities, specialist toileting facilities, to very intimate personal care through the day, and that's being provided in those mainstream settings. They're not in a mainstream classroom necessarily with their children of their own peer group all the time. Hopefully, in placing them in those settings, they can access some of that collegiate time with their peers and with their friends. But please do not labour under any illusion that that support is not there in place for those children who need that, because it is. And we could go to any one of those settings and show you that level of support that's needed. The piece around those much more complex neurodevelopmental challenges, which we're seeing increase on a day-by-day basis, and there's a note in the strategy document about a really interesting piece of work that's been commissioned by the 5 local authorities to track the growing demand of differing types of ALN need over time across the kind of the Greater Gwent area. But that type of need is growing, and I think that is something that we will have to think very carefully about where we provide for it. Now, it might well be that the opportunity that's presented with the renewal of the 3 through 19 school in Abergavenny might well provide us with that opportunity, and that would become our centre of excellence for that type of provision. However, I want members to be aware that we're in discussions with the other directors within the Greater Gwent area and within the Health Authority about the potential. There is a school site, as everybody will be aware, in the south of the county that could have the potential for a regional solution. Because I think, you know, if you look at solutions such as the Sereni Children's Centre, we have to think about providing at that level, at a regional level, to have the absolute expertise for the number of children that we'll have to provide that level of support for into the future. So we're about trying to find the right level of support. And I think that the model that has been outlined by colleagues this morning does give us that opportunity. With the expansion in Abergavenny that we could potentially see, we will actually see more than 155 places. If I was to say to people, you know, there's a 155 place special school within Monmouthshire, nobody would be discomforted by that fact. I think everybody would draw significant comfort that we've got that capacity. One of those spaces isn't as full as it might be because Monmouth has only been open a year or so that's a developing provision. So I'm confident that we will be able to, with the work of the leaders we've got in this space at the moment, develop the provision over time to meet those needs. But as we said, and as Councillor Grocott said in his opening question, there will always be some children who have to go out of county. And that's the same for those schools, for those counties where they have special schools. For instance, in Torvine, they have Crown Bridge. I'm absolutely aware of the fact that Torvine places a significant number of children in an independent school in Monmouthshire. So even where those schools exist, it does not become the single answer to all of the questions that this incredibly dynamic and changing kind of cohort of pupils present as challenges to us as professionals to make sure that they have the best start, that we can afford them. I'm going to stop talking now and I'm going to hand over to Lucy, who will talk about some of the benefits of that SNRB model.
Hi, yeah, I work regularly within our SNRBs, particularly personally in our primary SNRBs, which stands for Special Needs Resource Base. But which Jackie mentioned earlier, we're rethinking through the name because special needs is going to be something of the past in terms of language. And our current SNRBs, they offer great support to a great number of children and their families within Monmouthshire. So I talked earlier about, and Councillor Grocott talked about staff support and how we have a forum within which staff support each other, which we talked about earlier. So we have a great number of needs within those, our special needs resource bases. So from children with significant ASD, so barriers to their inclusion because of ASD, children with physical, medical difficulties, and those needs are met very well within our SNRBs, where there can be some inclusion with the mainstream peers. That's really important and that's really harnessed. And it really benefits the children within the mainstream who get to know the children within their community who otherwise they wouldn't. So, and those children with ALN and their families can connect with their communities and they can be a cross benefit. Morwenna talked about the research around inclusion for children with ALN, both children with ALN and without ALN. So we have a really strong model, which also builds capacity within our mainstream schools. So we use that model to enhance the skills of mainstream staff. So it's been a really successful model for us in Monmouthshire, one which we want to harness our strengths and develop our capacity with our existing model, whilst thinking about our mainstream provision. So hopefully that gives you a flavour of some of the really complex work that goes on within our SNRBs.
Okay.
Can I just add to that? Sorry, Councillor Tudor. Just that, I think this is a really exciting opportunity. I've worked in 2 other local authorities which had very big special schools. This is not a lesser provision. This is something that is just different to what other local authorities have. But our commitment and our investment in terms of time and actual money in developing our resource bases is something that I think is quite unique and I think should be celebrated in terms of what Monmouthshire is doing for children with really complex needs. If you walk into Overmono resource base, you will see children there that in any other local authority would be in a special school. These are really complex children and the staff there do an extraordinary job. The staff across all our resource base do an extraordinary job meeting their needs and did so throughout the extremely challenging COVID period as well. So I think we've got a huge amount to celebrate. There's, of course, the strategy document shows the work we've got to do and the work we're continuing to do. The fact that we're investing, we're every resource base is refreshing all their sensory rooms and making them up to date and 21st century is a fantastic thing that, you know, we were able to, you know, we say to parents who perhaps may be feeling concerned that, you know, this is in a mainstream school, it's not the same as a special school. Actually, the facilities and the skills of the staff would match that of our special schools, you know, throughout the region. Just to go back to, I feel very passionately about that, and I really think it's, as I say, it's a model that we're developing, and that will be a model for other smaller local authorities potentially going forward. In terms of, just going back to Councillor Brown asked for about breakdown lead, and I apologise if some of the acronyms weren't explained. It's something I find very irritating myself, so I apologise if I didn't make some of those acronyms clear. But in terms of breakdown of need, that won't be, we present to DMT every month a detailed breakdown of our ALN, SEN needs. So at any point in time, we will have that data available to any councillor who wishes to see the detail behind the figures. So just to end on that. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Jackie. We go now, excuse me, to Councillor Joe Watkins.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'll declare a personal but non-prejudicial interest in that my son attends Caldecott SRB. So I will be speaking somewhat from experience. Will has answered, well, alluded possibly to answers to a few of my questions. So I'll skim over them quickly. So I'm a little bit concerned that the report doesn't mention any planned capacity increase in our actual numbers. In terms of, in particular, the primary sector. I can see that we've got capacity at secondary because of Monmouth, but in terms of the primary, and anecdotally, I also know that a local parent, who I'm in communication with lots and lots of ALN local parents, who said that they weren't offered a local place, which would obviously have been Pembroke from our point of view, being down here in Caldecott, and they were told their son would have to go all the way to Monmouth if they were to get that. So do we actually have sufficient capacity for our primary needs at the moment? And are we planning on increasing it? Because as your report shows very clearly, we are seeing increased identification of special needs at these stages. I also am concerned about the, I know this is partly what Councillor Brown was referring to as well, the emotional and social behavioural difficulties, and the fact that we do have an increasing issue with that. And quite frequently, the children who exhibit those behaviours aren't actually well suited to then being placed in the SRBs. Because naturally, if you are a child, my son has autism, highly anxious. If you place him next to a child who's got emotional and social behavioural difficulties, that's never going to be a working situation. So what is our strategy for dealing with children who have those emotional and behavioural issues, and where are we going to be planning on dealing with that situation? I loved the idea that we are looking at trauma-informed schools. My other declaration is that I'm an adoptive parent, and know that early life trauma can have significant in relation to how children present in primary schools, and the fact that schools' behavioural policies may be very different if you're dealing with a child who may have attachment disorder, for example. So how are we developing in that area as well? Because that is extremely good to see that it's even flagged up, so that's wonderful. And then the other thing that was of great interest to me was improved website information for parents, because frankly, yeah, that has been a massive issue. You haven't got a clue what's out there, you don't know what you're entitled to, you don't know to ask the question. So part of my job as a councillor I've always taken is to explain the complexities of this to people, but it would be wonderful if I could point people at a website. Thank you very much.
So I'll on this one, I think if I just pick up Councillor Watkins's comments around capacity, and then I'll pass on to colleagues to pick up those other aspects, which will they'll be much better placed to answer than I. So I think the capacity point is a point really well made, and you know there is an imbalance between secondary and primary at the moment in terms of the size of the SNRBs. I think that we need to wait and see what the Mastodon review of expected demand coming through the system is, and then we can make a really good decision about where we invest for future capacity if it's required, which I suspect, to echo the points which are in all of the papers and behind Councillor Watkins's question, there will be a need for additional capacity. So we will do that in the fullness of that informed position to make sure that we can respond to those needs in a planned way. So yes, I think you're right. We do need to look at that capacity. I think that the opportunity to grow the capacity in Abergavenny and to support the kind of the northwestern side of the authority is a really big step forward. That capacity will obviously be online and in stream by 2024 is the proposed timeline for the opening of the new school. So there's that opportunity there. That will in turn displace some of the children who currently have to travel to Monmouth, and hopefully that will have a benefit of equalising across the three settings. But we will continue to look to make sure that that the centres are all big enough. Councillor Watkins, on your first point, I'll hand over to colleagues to pick up on your specific points around provision and how that's managed.
I'll start, and then I'm going to hand over to Morwenna and or Lucy with regard to your concerns with the social emotional behavioural question. In terms of local places, what Will has already said, I mean, I would be surprised actually. I'm surprised that we would have said you have to go from Pembroke to Monmouth, because actually over Mono is a setting that's extremely full, and we've got a little bit of capacity in Pembroke. So maybe there's some miscommunication there, and we need perhaps to outside this meeting perhaps help sort out any sort of misunderstanding regarding that. With regard to, I absolutely agree, but the website development was picked up by Estin. It's in our work stream A. We've already started work regionally. There's been a group led by SNAP with parents who are developing a whole suite of information for parents, which regionally we signed up to. We're just in the process. It's actually in one of the work streams. This will go to DMT for, obviously, just so that my colleagues in DMT see what has been proposed by SNAP in collaboration with parents, and that will be the beginning of our reformed and revised web page, which I absolutely agree needs to be far more informative. And that's something we want to do together with parents in Monmouthshire and with schools. So all feedback, Councillor Watkins, will be extremely welcome on that, because it's only when people are using it that we actually that we know whether it's working or not working. So I'm really grateful for your observations there, and that is, watch this space, or watch that space I should say, because that's something we have already picked up on as needs to be developed. Now I'm going to hand over, I think, Morwenna, is it you in the first instance going to talk a little bit more about our provision for children with more challenging behaviour that challenges.
I'm happy to have a go at answering that question. So I think one of the things that myself and Lucy feel quite passionately about is that we rethink in Monmouthshire, considering children, who have typically been thought of having behaviour difficulties as children who have emotional and social difficulties that are reflected through their behaviour. It's really important. We're on a bit of a mission really to build the understanding and therefore the capacity within our mainstream schools and settings that people understand that behaviour is a communication and it is a reflection of an emotional or additional learning need that perhaps is going unmet. So we are, particularly with our wellbeing hats on, that me and Lucy also wear the wellbeing lead element, and we are quite tuned into and part of the CAMS transformation steering group and some of the projects that are coming out of that, including work with community psychology, for instance, and the whole school approaches to mental health and emotional wellbeing that's going on in school. So part of that is about us enhancing understanding, promoting really good practice and developing capacity around all professionals working with children and young people who present with behaviours that challenge, about that sort of understanding of of what those behaviours are telling us and how we can support and work with those young people. You know, all of the evidence currently around, and there's an awful lot, because the pandemic has obviously, for obvious reasons, kick-started an awful lot more work and resource around this focus on sort of emotional well-being and mental health needs of young people, is around really understanding that the key to meeting those needs is around relationships and connections with young people, and that lots of that work can be done within mainstream settings with support. So you know, some of our children with the most complex level of needs around sort of, as you suggested, sort of early relational trauma and attachment difficulties, for instance, are supported through either the SAPRA perhaps, or a statement, you know, having a statement, and have quite bespoke and flexible provision within Monmouthshire to meet those needs. I think there's an awful lot that's sort of going on behind the scenes, and I'm sort of, Lucy and Jackie, feel free to chip in here, but I think really we are on a bit of a mission in terms of developing capacity in this area. We have been a little bit curtailed by the pandemic, and so our focus obviously switched a little bit when the lockdown hit, and then the reintegration of children back into schools around supporting specifically around that. But actually that opened a lot of doors as well to engage with schools over this understanding of behaviour, and actually this reflection of, you know, children's emotional state and their presentation, and trying to come away from what we describe as, you know, behaviour with a capital B, and removing that and understanding children in terms of their, you know, understanding their feelings, their emotional regulation, the skills that they need to develop to enable them to behave in a way that fits within the sort of expectations of our schools and provisions. I don't know, Lucy or Jackie, if you've got anything to add there, and whether I've responded to that question fully.
I think, you know, we could mention a couple of the initiatives that are being developed at the moment around emotionally school-based arrangements. Yes.
Thank you. Sorry, I forgot about that one. Yeah, so at the moment we are, myself and Lucy are, well, actually we took it to DMT last week. We have done a cross-directorate proposal with some money that was available to Monmouthshire from the Welsh Government around the wellbeing grant, and that so is social care and education around identifying a sort of work stream and guidance and training for professional training for staff and local authority colleagues around children who are experiencing emotionally based school avoidance. So in the past that's been called school refusal or anxiety, you know, around attending school, and that's a really big and quite exciting piece of work that we're hoping to roll out from January. We've got to take it to the head teachers is our next step for consultation, but that's been developed in light of, actually it was being developed prior to the pandemic hitting, but actually the pandemic has just drawn it again really to our attention as a real need of understanding again some behaviours and avoidance of attending school as being anxiety related, and actually we need our schools to be better at meeting those needs, because that isn't, those children don't need to go to a specialist provision. They don't need something different. They need their schools, their community schools and their local schools to enhance the relationships and invest in the relationships so children are ready to learn. There is no point us going down the thing of trying to get them to learn something and sit GCSEs or whatever until actually we can get a child in school feeling safe and secure and, you know, encompassed in relationships where they feel valued and important. And I think so that's a really big piece of work that we're developing at the moment, and we're hoping to, if we get agreement from the 4 secondary schools and our local authority colleagues who are you know, developing this work with us, we're hoping to start rolling that out into across Monmouthshire from January, in the hope that that will make a real difference to many children who are experiencing anxiety anyway, but actually are now experiencing enhanced anxiety and difficulties in getting to school in the current sort of pandemic situation.
Okay, okay, thank you for that. Go to Dimitri Bertuni, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just sorry, I was just taking that previous response about emotional behaviour, and I can't say I was reassured by the answer. So we closed down Mountain House, and I'm just worried about the sequencing, about we're developing capacity to deal with children with challenging and potentially violent behaviour after we've shut down the school at children with challenging behaviour like that. So that worries me that the plan wasn't, or we haven't developed those capacities before we've actually shut down the school. But moving on that, 2 or 3 questions. One is the Act requires, or Act says that we can provide provision up to 0 to 25. I think Martin said 24. But look at our current modelling, and maybe I've missed it. Maybe you've mentioned it and I've missed it. But we're only factoring to cater up to 19. Yeah. Have I got that correct? Are we not going to plan to take on young adults? If not, why not? That would be great. On the document 12, page 10, under 12. I've been in this council maybe too long already, and I know that 12I says improve the capacity of central ALN services in terms of personnel, which is something I've completely supported for years and years and years. But that was a complete reverse from the previous policy, which was to reduce central capacity and empower schools with more capacity. And now we've about turned. Can you tell me why we've about turned on that? Although I welcome it, but that is a complete reversal of previous policy. And on 13 and 13A, on that document, now I'm just going to scroll down to it myself. How will we judge how we're successful, how the strategy is successful? One is, are we going to have, and this is a bugbear of mine with this council, are we going to have baseline quantitative data at some point by which we can judge whether you have or have not been successful? And when will you present that evidence? And secondly, on bullet point 1, you've put parent and carers will have a high level of confidence in local authority's ability to identify and meet the needs of their children. Something I completely support. Is there something around that we're identifying that not only are we appeasing, not appeasing is the wrong word, but assuaging the concerns of parents and carers, but also but actually meeting the needs of the children, even if it disagrees with their parents and carers, if that makes sense? Is there a slight subtlety there we're missing, where what the parents and carers view might be slightly different to what the children's needs are? And I know that's a grey area, we're limited to that, but is there something we have to be more cognizant of when thinking about how we meet the needs of these children? Thank you, Chair.
Well, are you going to lead on?
Yeah, if I can, and then I'll pass over to colleagues who will pick those up. So in terms of the developing capacity, I think the important thing to note in that position, Councillor Petruni, is that clearly there have always been children with emotional, social, behavioural needs who wouldn't ever have got near the threshold of having to attend Mountain House School. So we're not necessarily talking about the same population. So we are having taken the decision around the principal educational psychology and wellbeing leads, really seeking to ensure that our professionals are as well equipped, as well informed about the latest developments in how we support that much bigger population who have always existed and resided in our schools, to make sure we can make their school experience a better experience. So I think we're not talking about the same population as regards to those children who went to Mountain House. And we know from our own numbers who we placed into Mountain House, it was a decreasing number. And we know that we weren't able to support all of the children in Monmouthshire because it was a boys only facility. So this is about a much broader set of interventions, upskilling and engagement with staff to make sure that every single member of staff in the classroom is able to recognise that there will be drivers behind that behaviour that challenges, and they are able to understand it and support those children to develop their way through that. So I think I'm not really sure that I would agree with the premise for your question there. I think with regards to your question around the capacity, we are seeing the change in the legislation brings with it significant expectations of very specific roles. So we now have a young person's or an early years ALN lead. We've appointed to that post. We've made both Lucy and Morwenna our leads for well-being. We've also recruited recently, I think it was successfully, into our educational psychology team. We are currently, because of the approach that we're taking in Monmouthshire, and I will defer to my colleagues to describe this, attracting very, very high quality professionals from across the region and England who want to come to Monmouthshire because of the ethos and the approach that we've been able to describe and set out to them. So the balance of, I think the balance between the authority, we are upskilling and creating greater capacity internally because the Act demands that, and we need to be able to respond to the changes around IDPs and so on. But I think the most important and the most significant shift is that piece around the relational aspects that Councillor Grocott alluded to earlier. This is about us, yes, empowering our special needs resource bases to be able to provide the very best that they can for the children who are placed there, but also that we have a key role in maintaining equity and excellence across those bases. So we've got to have both of those sides of equal strength if this is going to be the success that we want it to be. I think your final point about the parents' position, wherever I've discussed this with colleague directors across Wales, there will inevitably be at some points tensions between what professional colleagues such as Lucy and Morwenna identify as a child's needs and what type of setting can meet those child's needs, and what parents and carers sometimes want to see their children access. And that tension, I think, is probably, and Jackie will be able to reflect on it probably as well, that tension has probably always been there. And it works in both ways. Sometimes there will be children who we have suggested require a setting that might be an independent specialist setting, and the parents would very, very much want them to be have their needs met in a mainstream school, and often it works the other way as well. But I think having that very clear commitment that parents actually recognise the levels of skill and capacity and excellence in our settings, that they are committed and understand the route that we're taking, that it is a flow of education provision from 3 all the way up to 19 in school, is really important. So I think that is critical. I'm going to hand over to Jackie to talk about the baseline, because I know we've invested recently in the provision across all of our SNOBs of a measuring tool that will allow you as members to see the progress that our learners make in school. Obviously, that has to be set against qualitative data that we draw from annual reviews and other feedback that we have from the teachers who work in those schools. But I'll pass that on to colleagues now, and I'm sure Jackie will talk about the post-education up to 24 or 25. I saw Councillor Grocott's explanatory comment in the chat, and she will talk about that. That is something that I'm sure will require a regional solution for those older young people. But I'll pass over to Jackie. Jackie, you're on mute.
First of the meeting, I'm devastated I'm the one to have actually got that special badge. Yeah, up to our commitment under the new Act, this is 0 to 25, or Councillor Grocott's absolutely right, up to the person's 25th birthday, as it is at the moment, up to 19. But in terms of school, our responsibilities of maintaining the IDPs in school will be, as it is now, up to 19. There will be, as part of the work that's actually started that Morwenna referred to earlier in terms of that post-16 work, that other provision, further education that we were looking at for young people who are moving into further education post-19. Now, what that will look at like at the moment, I really don't know. I think that there will be significant pressure on colleges to perhaps provide placements for longer than actually Welsh Government have originally thought would be possible, because currently it's 2 up to 3 years maximum. So the reality is that for most young people now, it is not up to the age of 25. But obviously this is a changing and evolving landscape. We will be responsible for the child's or young person or young adults ITP up to the age of 24, if that's still appropriate. But that won't be within our schools. But the work we're beginning now, as Morwenna has already described, we've got our first steering group on Friday, is part of all our planning to actually make sure that we're in the right position to actually take that forward. In terms of quantitative data, you're absolutely right. And this was something, again, Estin identified. We've had over the years, I was able to produce for our inspection a whole range of data that our resource bases were able to provide to show the progress that their children and young people were making. However, it was using slightly different systems. It was delivered in slightly different formats. So part of the work we've been doing is looking at the best IT software to actually help our resource bases make appropriate assessments of their children and young people, and then to be able to plot and report on their progress. Two of our resource bases are already using a tool called B Squared, which is a very well-known piece of software. And we've agreed collaboratively with all of us that this is something we're going to take forward. Interestingly, Rhondda Cynon have done something very similar recently, and we always like to see what someone else has done first, so we can either make sure we get a same good deal or even better. So in fact, I'm meeting with Jan Hill, our IT guru, this Friday to talk about the work that was done in RCT by B Squared, because they had a facility where they were able to have reports directly into the local authority. And I think it's really important that we're able to demonstrate at every level how well our resource bases are doing and the progress those children are making. So that is something we've got planned, and I'm hoping within a very short period of time we'll be able to demonstrate that to members. I think that was all. And I think the other thing I wanted to say around parents and carers, the driving force of the ALN reform is person-centred practice. That is something that is absolutely central to it. The child is at the centre of everything we do. And actually, I'd like to recognise that Monmouthshire, and particularly the work that Will has driven, every presentation he has, he is the child at the centre of what he does, and all the work that has come out of the work with Floyd is all person-centred work. So this is a continuation of that. Children's wishes and feelings and thoughts on what they want from their education is central to what every bit of planning we will be doing. And in fact, within the legislation, I think that when a child reaches 16, they will actually be actively asked what they want, and what they want will hold, as long as they have capacity, will drive provision going forward. So I think it's a really important area. But person-centred practice is what's going to be driving our approach to that. So we take account of the child's views in that as well.
Okay, thank you, Jackie. See, Councillor Louise Brown's hands back up. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to add, as part of the recommendations, that the draft consultation strategy report is updated to reflect the figures that are in the cover report, because obviously they're 2020 figures, and the figures you've got in there are 2019. And I think it would be helpful to have some explanation about the statements and why they're going up or down accordingly. And obviously with the IDPs, we expect to have an increase in any event, don't we, because of the fact that you don't need a medical assessment to get an IDP. And it looks like, from my look at the legislation, as if it's possibly easier to get an IDP. And I don't know how the IDPs would fit into these, school action plus type of categories. So it's not really clear, because obviously, statements is the sort of the highest level. The second point I'd like to make is, obviously, we've got a particular strategy in our authority, but we don't know what the comparative strategies are in other Gwent authorities. And I think it would be useful, Will McLean mentioned about a strategy on special schools looking across Gwent, and I think it would be useful to know what's going on, because you know, I did hear from Mountain House school destinations that they were going to different types of projects in Newport, and I think it would be useful to actually understand what those projects are. I think was it Newport Living or something of that nature. And I think if the difficulty we have of judging the strategy we've got is we don't know how it compares to other strategies in other local authorities. And I think it would be useful if we had some sort of baseline to look at that, you know, so that we had a comparative basis, because obviously we've had a strategy presented here. We don't know how that compares to other local authorities in the area. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Brown.
If I just come back very quickly on those points, Councillor, yeah, we will make sure that the relevant documents have got the most up-to-date numbers in them, and we'll provide that explanation as to the direction of travel for statements and so on. I think just as an aside, I guess, we're seeing many more parents and families ask for statutory assessment leading to a statement, because there is clarity in their eyes, and I guess in the eyes of the law at the moment, about what a statement is, what it entitles you to, and the process that leads to its creation. Clearly, as we walk towards a new structure in the IDPs, that isn't there. And I think, you know, that's one of the things which is driving some of the additional statutory assessments that we're being asked to complete at the moment. I think it's an interesting point around the comparative strategies of the other local authorities, because obviously the 5 of Gwent's local authorities all start from a different context, different types of needs, different types of existing provision, and so on. But I think we can certainly begin to provide some context as to, you know, what is happening in other places that will potentially give some colour to the to that kind of setting of the scene for the document which we've shared with you today. One thing I would just say is that through the work of Jackie and our colleagues in Mon Life, we've been able to develop a bespoke provision for a young man who had very, very significant challenges in accessing mainstream. I think the work that we've done cross directorates there has been exemplary. I think the pilot, which it is at the moment, is going really well and delivering good benefits. And I think that kind of equivalent we will see rolled out as something that Monmouthshire and Mon Life can offer our students in the future. So that type of good practice that we've seen in Newport is something which we can look to develop locally as well, and is something that we have developed locally. But I take both of the points from Councillor Brown, and we'll make sure that they are put into the further drafts, Chair.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Will, and thank you, Councillor Brown. Are there any other comments or questions on the ALN report? No, well, in that case, obviously like to thank the Chief Officer, Will McLean, and Lucy Doyle, Jackie Elias, and Morwenna Wagstaff for presenting the report this morning and taking a myriad of questions. Ranging.
Hello.
Oh, hi. Sorry, Maggie. Your hand has flashed up on and off. Do you want to come in?
Yes, if I may.
Yeah, by all means.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for the very enlightening reports. I declare an interest in as much that I am a governor at Derry View School. So my tendency is towards the primary aspect of things. We've had, but I've been interested in the right through to 24. We were talking about, and you have mentioned, you know, that early diagnosis for any of these children is absolutely crucial. And I think historically, and please correct me that this is changing now, but one of our problems at Derry View, and I think perhaps other schools as well, was actually getting easy, quick access to the educational psychology system. And that always seemed to be the big hiccup. I would be very reassured if someone could tell me whether that actually is now improving. But I think the plan itself per se is very exciting. And just to mention anecdotally, we were talking about the behaviour of children at school and the difficulty of COVID. But our teacher has interestingly said to me that there are some children with whom are more interesting than others. When they have returned post-COVID, have actually found that the security of school and the support that they have is indicated by the fact that their behaviour levels have actually improved. So it isn't all doom and gloom, but the early diagnosis is actually my primary concern, because we actually have a nursery, and I know from nursery up until reception was the difficult phase, because if you get it early, you can get it sorted, and then later on, you may not have the problems, but if you late diagnose, it's chaos. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks, Maggie. Sorry I missed you there.
Okay.
As I say, going back to sort of very brief summing up, I'd say many thanks to Will and the team this morning for presenting. Good, wide-ranging discussion, particularly from Councillor Martin and Grogert, about the issue of provision, and particularly where the unit in Dairyview is going to move to, etc. Obviously, as a group, we welcome the report, and I think there's been a great deal of support here, particularly as many people have said, in terms of early identification, and certainly in my other role on looked after children, corporate parenting, early intervention and identification is crucial. Something that came up there, which Maggie has just raised, is the fact that during COVID, some children with anxiety issues and other issues about attending school and issues about bullying, etc., some children have actually flourished more by being at home and learning, doing the blended learning and learning at home without having the worry of going into school and perhaps facing some of their peer group who are difficult with them, or in some ways make them more anxious, and in fact their attainment levels appear to have gone up, and probably, you know, in terms of the long term, blended learning is going to be something that's not going to go away. For some learners it's probably better. Very broad-ranging discussion. I think, unless I'm being corrected here, I think there is general agreement for this draft report going forward, with the points that we've raised today, and I know Will has made note of those. I do feel strongly that children and young adults need to be supported right up to the age of 24 or 25, whichever way you actually take that. I do think as well that in terms of Welsh medium, as that develops, there needs to be development of specialist support for those youngsters. And for people who don't operate in the language, I think sometimes people find it quite difficult to understand that there is a significant difference. And my background was mainly in exams and assessment, working for WJC, but we've provided all papers, obviously, through the medium of Welsh. Even down to Russian through the medium of Welsh, which is an interesting paper. But I think if you don't operate in a particular language, and I only operate in two, I don't operate very well in anything else, but it is very difficult to comprehend the subtle differences and nuances in language, and that is a major concern. But once again, thanks for your input. I'm sure you'll take on board the comments from the scrutiny committee, and I'm sure we will return to this topic at a future date. Once again, diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much.
Diolch yn fawr. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now we move to the agenda item 5, Children and Young People Select Forward Work Programme, and we will be looking at the two issues of play provision within the authority, and also we will be looking at Welsh medium provision, and particularly the siting of the new school in Monmouthshire, which is obviously a huge step forward. I don't know, Hazel, if you want to come in terms of the point 6, which is to confirm the date and time of the next meeting.
Yes, Chair. I think there's been some potential change to membership of this committee, and we may be losing Councillor David Hughes-Jones and receiving Councillor Francis Taylor in his place. So we were going to mention to the committee whether they would prefer to stick with Tuesdays or move to the date of Thursdays, which is what we used to sort of hold for this sort of meeting. So I think from next year onwards, the plan is to move back to Thursdays and to try to have one scrutiny meeting a week rather than how they've currently fallen with potentially 2 or 3 in the same week and then like nothing for 3 weeks. So I think that's going to be looked at for the diary next year. But you've got your next meeting on the 8th of December. There's then the 19th of January, which is the budget scrutiny. There was some concern that that date might not work, but I think that's resolved now and we could stick Tuesday if you want to. But there was a suggestion that we actually change the March meeting slightly and move it back a little. So instead of holding it on the 9th of March, we would move it to the 25th of March, which would be a Thursday.
Well, my suggestion would be obviously we stick to the 8th, we stick to the 19th for the budget, and we move the 9th of March to the 25th, unless people have got major issues with that.
And would people be happy if we do that and then from then on go with a Thursday rather than the Tuesday?
I'm in people's hands there. I'm happy with Thursday, but Maureen, do you want to say something? Yes, you're saying thumbs up from Maureen. I'm hearing a assent. Martin, yes, I think we're winning. And obviously, well, that brings us to the end of the meeting. Obviously, thank you for all your inputs today and for listening so well to 2 very important reports, the housing and the ALN. And certainly, Hazel and myself wanted to put in this extra meeting. I'm really grateful that you agreed to come in on that. Joe, do you have your hand up?
Sorry, I have taken it down, but sometimes this just doesn't work.
All right, sorry, okay. Louise, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wondered, following on from the report we had today, whether we could put in the future work programme about, the Gwent strategy on ALNs, different local authorities' strategies on ALNs.
Okay.
So that we could have a comparison to see what the different approaches are.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, we'll certainly, bear that in mind. I'll finish now. I'll give you a warning. 8th of December, I will be making probably a major input on Welsh medium, but I warn you in advance. It will be in English, mind. But once again, thanks for your help this morning. Thanks for attending this extra meeting. I know we've all got busy schedules, and I hope you have a fairly pleasant rest of the day. Thank you very much.